The shotgun blast echoed through the frozen canyon at 2 in the morning. Elena Cruz stood over a dying man, smoke curling from her grandfather's weapon, while 3 coyotes scattered into the darkness, their jaws still wet with his blood. She didn't know his name. She didn't know the bullet wounds weren't from any animal. She only knew that if she walked away, he'd be dead by sunrise. And 19-year-old girls in forgotten Wyoming towns don't save Hell's Angels without consequences. Before we continue, tell us where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, subscribe, and stay until the end. This story will change how you see family forever. The phone call came at 1:47 a.m. Elena's hand shot out from under the blanket, knocking over an empty coffee mug before finding the cracked screen. The caller ID showed unknown, but in Coldwater Creek, unknown calls at this hour meant one thing: trouble. Miss Cruz. The voice was old, trembling. This is Mabel from the gas station up on Route 9. Elena sat up, her bare feet hitting the cold floor. Mabel, it's almost 2 in the morning. I know, honey, I know. But there's been some kind of crash up near Devil's Bend. I heard it from my window, metal screaming, then nothing. I called Sheriff Dawson, but he ain't picking up. You're the only one with a truck that can make it up that road in this snow. Elena was already pulling on her boots. How long ago? Maybe 20 minutes? I would have called sooner, but I wasn't sure if... I'm going. She hung up before Mabel could finish. Her grandfather's old Chevy sat in the garage, keys still in the ignition where she'd left them 3 days ago. The engine coughed twice before roaring to life, and Elena grabbed the shotgun from behind the seat, a habit her grandfather had drilled into her since she was 12. You never know what's waiting in the dark, mija, he used to say, but you can make damn sure it knows you're not afraid. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Fear had died with him 6 months ago. The drive to Devil's Bend took 15 minutes on clear roads. Tonight, with 3 inches of fresh snow and ice patches that gleamed like broken glass under her headlights, it took nearly 30. Elena gripped the wheel so hard, her knuckles turned white, leaning forward to peer through the windshield. She almost missed him. The motorcycle lay on its side at the edge of the cliff, one wheel still spinning slowly in the wind. The man was about 20 feet away, dragging himself through the snow with one arm, leaving a dark trail behind him. Blood. Too much blood. Elena slammed the brakes, threw open the door, and ran toward him without thinking. Hey, can you hear me? He didn't respond. His leather jacket was torn across the back, and even in the darkness she could see the wounds, deep gashes across his shoulder. His leg bent at a wrong angle beneath the crushing weight of the fallen Harley. That's when she heard them. The coyotes. 3 of them, maybe 50 yards away, their eyes reflecting her headlights like tiny orange flames. They were waiting patient the way predators wait when they know their prey can't escape. Elena raised the shotgun, aimed high, and fired. The blast split the silence like a thunderclap. The coyotes scattered, disappearing into the tree line, but she knew they wouldn't go far. The smell of blood would bring them back. It always did. She dropped to her knees beside the man, pressing her fingers to his neck. Pulse weak, but there. His eyes fluttered open, gray and unfocused, and for a moment he looked at her like she was a ghost. Don't move, she said. I'm going to get you out of here. Leave me. His voice was barely a whisper, rough with pain. They'll come back. The coyotes, I can handle coyotes. Not them. He grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. The men who did this. They'll come back. You need to run. Elena stared at him. Up close, she could see he wasn't just injured from the crash. There were burn marks on his arms, and the wound on his shoulder that wasn't from any animal. That was a bullet graze. "Who did this to you?" He didn't answer. His grip loosened, and his eyes rolled back. "Hey, stay with me." She slapped his face harder than she meant to. "What's your name? Tell me your name." "Crash," he muttered. "They call me Crash." "Well, Crash, you're not dying on my watch. You hear me?" She ran back to the truck, threw open the tailgate, and grabbed the emergency blanket and rope she kept for towing. When she returned, the coyotes had crept closer, their silhouettes visible at the edge of her headlight beams. Elena fired again, not at them, but close enough to send dirt and snow spraying across their path. They retreated, snarling. "I said get back." The man Crash was fading fast. She looped the rope under his arms and began dragging him toward the truck, her boots slipping on ice, her muscles screaming with effort. He was easily 200 pounds, maybe more, and every inch felt like a mile. "Come on, come on, come on!" She got him to the tailgate, and somehow God only knew how managed to heave him onto the truck bed. Her arms shook as she covered him with the blanket, and that's when she noticed the vest. Leather. Black. With patches she recognized from TV, from news stories, from her grandfather's old photographs. Hell's Angels. The winged skull stared up at her, stitched in red and white. Below it the words Black Ridge Chapter. Enforcer. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Some men live by a code most people don't understand, Mija. Doesn't make them bad, just makes them different." Chumps. She looked at the unconscious biker, at the blood soaking through the blanket at the bullet wound that told her someone wanted him dead. Then she climbed into the driver's seat and headed home. The garage behind her grandfather's shop was the only building in Coldwater Creek with a working heating system. Elena had spent the last 6 months living there, sleeping on a cot beside his old tool bench, unable to face the empty house they'd shared. Now that garage was a makeshift emergency room. She'd dragged Crash inside, laid him on the workbench, and cut away what was left of his shirt. The damage was worse than she'd feared. 3 bullet grazes, shoulder ribs, and hip. A compound fracture in his left leg where the motorcycle had pinned him. Cuts and bruises covering almost every inch of exposed skin. "You should be dead," she muttered, threading a needle with fishing line. "You know that, right?" He didn't answer. His breathing was shallow, ragged, but steady. Elena had learned field medicine from her grandfather, a skill he'd picked up in Vietnam, and passed down like a family heirloom. She'd stitched wounds before, set bones before, but never like this. Never on someone who looked like they'd been through a war. She worked for 3 hours straight, barely pausing to breathe. When she finally tied off the last stitch and wrapped his leg in a splint made from broken shelf boards, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the gauze. Dawn was breaking through the garage windows when Crash finally opened his eyes again. "Where?" He tried to sit up and immediately collapsed back, groaning. "Don't move. You've got a broken leg, 3 bullet wounds, and about a dozen cuts that needed stitches. Moving is not on your agenda today." He turned his head slowly, taking in the garage, the tools, the oil stains, the faded poster of a 1965 Mustang on the wall. "Who are you?" Elena Cruz. You crashed about 5 miles from here. I found you before the coyotes finished what someone else started." His jaw tightened. "How much did you see?" "Enough to know those wounds didn't come from any crash." Silence. He stared at the ceiling, something dark and heavy moving behind his eyes. "You should have left me out there." "Probably." Elena pulled up a chair and sat down, crossing her arms. "But I didn't. So now you're going to tell me who shot you and why, because whoever did this might come looking for you. And if they do, I need to know what I'm dealing with." Crash turned to look at her, really look at her for the first time. She was small, maybe 5'4", with dark hair pulled back in a messy braid and eyes that held no trace of fear. Just exhaustion and something harder. Something that had seen too much too young. "You're not scared of me," he said. It wasn't a question. "Should I be? I'm Hell's Angels. Most people run the other way. Most people didn't grow up with a grandfather who rode with your club 30 years ago." That got his attention. "Who was he?" "Miguel Cruz. They called him Ghost." Crash's eyes widened. "Ghost. From the Reno chapter. You knew him. Knew of him. Everyone did. He was a legend, one of the best enforcers the club ever had. Disappeared in the 90s, right before—" He stopped something clicking into place. "This is his shop." Elena nodded slowly. "He left the club to raise my mother. When she died, he raised me. Taught me everything he knew, how to fix engines, how to shoot, how to survive." "And where is he now?" The words stuck in her throat. "He died 6 months ago. Heart attack, they said." Crash watched her face carefully. "But you don't believe that?" "No." Her voice hardened. "I don't." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind rattling the garage door and the distant sound of a truck passing on the highway. Crash shifted on the workbench, wincing as the movement sent pain shooting through his leg. "You got any water?" Elena grabbed a bottle from the mini-fridge in the corner and handed it to him. He drank half in one long swallow, then set it down with a grimace. "The men who did this to me," he said slowly. "They're called the Iron Serpents. Small club, but dangerous. They've been running girls through Montana for the past 2 years trafficking. Our president's daughter was taken 8 months ago. We've been hunting them ever since." Elena's stomach turned. "Trafficking. Young girls mostly. Some from reservations, some runaways. Easy targets. The cops can't touch them. Half the sheriffs in 3 states are on their payroll." He paused, his gray eyes meeting hers. "Including yours." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Sheriff Dawson." "That's the one. He's been feeding them information for years. Routes, schedules which cops to avoid. In exchange, they make sure certain problems disappear." Elena thought of her grandfather, the way he'd started asking questions in the weeks before his death. The late-night phone calls, the worried look in his eyes whenever he saw a patrol car drive past the shop. "You think he killed my grandfather?" "I don't know. But I know your grandfather was looking into something before he died. Something that made powerful people nervous. How do you know that—" Crash reached into his vest pocket, slowly, painfully, and pulled out a small leather notebook. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age. "This was in the evidence I was transporting. Names, dates, transactions. Everything the Iron Serpents have done for the past 5 years, including payments to local law enforcement." He opened the book to a marked page. "Miguel Cruz is mentioned 3 times. He was building a case, gathering evidence. Someone found out and stopped him." Elena took the notebook with trembling hands. Her grandfather's handwriting stared back at her, cramped, precise, unmistakable. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew what they were doing, and they killed him for it. I'm sorry." She looked up, tears burning in her eyes. "Don't be sorry. Tell me how to make them pay." Crash studied her for a long moment. "You're not ready for that fight." "Don't tell me what I'm ready for." "I'm not trying to insult you. I'm trying to keep you alive. The Iron Serpents have 40 members, heavy weapons, and connections in every county from here to the Canadian border. You're one girl with a shotgun and a grudge. I'm one girl who just saved your life. That has to count for something." He almost smiled. "It counts, but right now the best thing you can do is let me heal. Let me contact my club, and let us handle this the way it needs to be handled. And what am I supposed to do in the meantime? Sit here and wait for them to come finish what they started? They don't know where I am. You sure about that? As if on cue, Crash's phone buzzed from inside his jacket. Elena fished it out and looked at the screen. A text message. Unknown number. We know you're alive. We know where you are. Hand over the book or we burn the whole town down. Elena's blood ran cold. Crash grabbed the phone, read the message, and swore under his breath. They must have tracked the GPS before I turned it off. So they're coming. Yeah. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw real fear in his eyes. Not for himself, but for her. They're coming, and they won't stop until they get what they want. Elena thought about running, about throwing this stranger back out into the snow and pretending none of this had ever happened. Then she thought about her grandfather, about the notebook in her hands, about the girls who'd been taken while men in uniforms looked the other way. She stood up and walked to the gun cabinet in the corner. How many bullets do you think we'll need? Crash watched her load the shotgun, his expression shifting from disbelief to something that looked almost like respect. You're serious? They killed my grandfather. They tried to kill you. And now they're threatening my town. She racked the slide with a satisfying click. I'm not running. Not from them. Not from anyone. You'll die. Maybe. But not tonight. She tossed him a pistol from the cabinet. He caught it with his good hand, checking the chamber automatically. You know how to use that? She asked. I've been using it longer than you've been alive. Good. Because I have a feeling we're going to need all the help we can get. The first headlights appeared at sunset. Elena watched them from the garage window, a black truck moving slowly down the main road, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. It paused at the gas station, then turned toward her property. They're here, she said quietly. Crash had managed to pull himself into a sitting position against the wall, the pistol resting in his lap. His face was pale, slick with sweat, but his eyes were alert. How many? One truck. Can't tell how many inside. There'll be more. They always send scouts first. The truck stopped about 100 yards from the garage engine idling. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the passenger door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, thin, with a face that looked like it had been carved from old leather. Tattoos covered his arms. Snakes, skulls, flames. He wore a vest similar to Crash's, but the patches were different. A coiled serpent with fangs bared. Iron serpents. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "We know you're in there, Crash, you and the girl. Come out now, and this doesn't have to get ugly." Elena's grip tightened on the shotgun. What do we do? Nothing. Yet. He's right there, and there are probably 2 more in that truck with rifles aimed at this door. The second you step outside, you're dead. The man outside waited, then laughed a cold, ugly sound. Have it your way. We've got all night. He turned back to the truck and pulled something from the bed. A jerry can. Elena's heart stopped. Is that gasoline? Crash's voice was grim. They're going to try to smoke us out. Or burn us alive. Yeah, that too. The man began walking toward the garage, unscrewing the cap. The smell hit Elena's nose before he was even halfway there, thick chemical, unmistakable. I need you to trust me, Crash said. Why? Because I'm about to do something very stupid and I need you to be ready when I do. What kind of stupid? He didn't answer. Instead, he raised the pistol, took aim through the window, and fired. The shot took the man in the knee. He went down screaming, the gas can rolling away into the snow. Immediately, gunfire erupted from the truck bullets, slamming into the garage walls, shattering glass, tearing through wood. "Down!" Crash yelled. Elena hit the floor, covering her head, as debris rained around her. The noise was deafening, overwhelming, nothing like the hunting trips her grandfather had taken her on. This was war, and she was right in the middle of it. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it started. Elena lifted her head slowly, ears ringing, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. The garage looked like a war zone, tools scattered, windows, destroyed, holes punched through the walls. "You okay?" Crash's voice seemed to come from very far away. "I think so. Good, because they're about to come through that door." She heard it then, boots crunching on snow, voices shouting commands. They were surrounding the building. "There's a back exit," she said. "Through the shop. It leads to the alley behind the hardware store. Can you make it? Can you?" He laughed, actually laughed, despite the blood soaking through his bandages. "Probably not, but you can. I'm not leaving you. You're not dying for me either. I already saved your life once. I'm not letting it go to waste." She grabbed his arm and hauled him upright. He bit back a scream, his broken leg dragging uselessly behind him, but he didn't argue. Together they stumbled toward the back of the garage. The door behind them exploded inward. Elena spun, raised the shotgun, and fired without thinking. The first man through fell backward, clutching his chest. The second hesitated just long enough for Crash to put 2 rounds through the doorframe. "Go!" he shouted. "Go now!" They ran. Or rather, Elena ran while half-carrying a man twice her size through a maze of oil drums and engine parts. The back door was rusted stuck, and she had to kick it 3 times before it burst open into the cold night air. Behind them, more gunfire, more shouting. "The truck!" Crash gasped. "Can you hotwire it? I can hotwire anything." They rounded the corner of the building. The black truck sat 20 yards away, the wounded scout still writhing in the snow nearby. Elena didn't hesitate. She dragged Crash to the passenger side, shoved him in, then sprinted around to the driver's seat. Her hands moved automatically, ignition wires, spark engine roaring to life. A bullet cracked the rear window. She floored the accelerator. The truck fishtailed on ice, nearly slamming into a fence post, but she corrected and aimed straight for the highway. In the rearview mirror, she saw 3 figures emerge from the garage, guns raised, watching them disappear into the night. "That was..." Crash coughed, blood flecking his lips. "That was something. Shut up and don't die." "Working on it." Elena gripped the wheel and didn't look back. They drove for an hour in silence, taking back roads Elena had memorized years ago when she was learning to drive on her grandfather's lap. The adrenaline faded slowly, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that made her hands shake on the wheel. "Where are we going?" Crash finally asked. "Somewhere safe. Or at least somewhere they won't find us tonight." "There's nowhere safe. Not from them." "Then we'll make somewhere safe." He looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "Why are you doing this?" "I told you. They killed my grandfather." "That's not enough. That's not enough to risk your life for a stranger." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "When I was 12, she said slowly, my grandfather took me up to Devil's Bend. Same place I found you. He told me that someday I'd have to make a choice, run from the darkness or face it. He said most people run. They tell themselves it's smarter, safer. But running just means the darkness catches someone else." She glanced at Crash, her eyes hard. "I'm done running. Whatever comes next, I'm facing it. And if that means helping you bring down the men who hurt us both, then that's exactly what I'm going to do." Crash studied her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. Your grandfather would be proud. I know. She turned back to the road. Somewhere in the distance, she could have sworn she heard the faint echo of motorcycle engines. But that might have been her imagination. Or it might have been the beginning of something none of them saw coming. The abandoned mine shaft had been Elena's secret since she was 14. Her grandfather had shown it to her during a hunting trip, pointing to the rusted entrance hidden behind overgrown brush. If anything ever happens, he'd said, you come here, nobody knows about this place. Nobody. She'd never understood why he'd been so serious that day. Now she did. Crash was barely conscious when she dragged him inside. His breathing had become shallow, irregular, and the bandages she'd wrapped around his wounds were soaked through with fresh blood. Stay with me, she said, lowering him onto a pile of old blankets she'd stashed here years ago. You don't get to die after I went through all that trouble. His eyes fluttered open. Bossy. Alive? There's a difference. She lit the emergency lantern and checked his wounds. The stitches had held, but the escape had torn something inside. He needed real medical care, not fishing line and vodka. There's a doctor, Crash said, reading her expression. In Millbrook, 20 miles east. Name's Harmon. He's patched up club members before. Can we trust him? More than anyone else right now. Elena grabbed the truck keys. Don't move. Don't make noise. Don't do anything stupid. What are you going to do? Get help. She was halfway to the entrance when his voice stopped her. Elena, she turned. If I don't make it, you're going to make it. If I don't, he pressed on. There's a GPS beacon sewn into my vest, inside the left pocket. Press it 3 times and hold for 5 seconds. It'll send a signal to my chapter. They'll come. Then why haven't you used it already? Because the serpents can track it too. Using it means bringing everyone, friends and enemies, right to us. Elena absorbed this information, filed it away. I'll be back in 2 hours. And if you're not, then you press that button and pray. She disappeared into the darkness before he could respond. The drive to Millbrook was the longest 20 miles of Elena's life. Every pair of headlights in her rearview mirror made her heart jump. Every shadow beside the road looked like a man with a gun. She found Dr. Harmon's clinic on the outskirts of town, a small building with a faded sign that read, Veterinary Services. But her grandfather had told her once that the best doctors for men who couldn't go to hospitals were the ones who officially treated animals. The door was locked. She pounded on it anyway. We're closed, a gruff voice from inside. I need Dr. Harmon. It's an emergency. Come back tomorrow. A man is dying. He was sent by the Black Ridge chapter. Silence. Then the sound of locks clicking open. The man who appeared was in his 60s with a gray beard and eyes that had seen too much. He looked her up and down, taking in the blood on her clothes, the desperation on her face. Who's hurt? They call him Crash. Something flickered in Harmon's expression. Recognition. Concern. Where is he? I can't tell you that, but I can bring you to him. You expect me to get in a car with a stranger in the middle of the night. I expect you to help save a man's life. Isn't that what you do? Harmon studied her for a long moment. Then he grabbed his medical bag from behind the door. Let's go. They drove in silence for the first 10 minutes. Elena kept checking the mirrors, watching for tails. Her nerves wound tight as piano wire. Your ghost's granddaughter, Harmon said suddenly. Elena nearly swerved off the road. How do you know that? You look just like him. Same eyes, same stubborn jaw. He shook his head slowly. I was sorry to hear about Miguel. He was a good man. You knew him. Knew him, girl. I've been patching up Hell's Angels since before you were born. Your grandfather was one of the few who never needed my services. Smart, careful, always thinking 3 steps ahead. He paused. Until he wasn't. Elena's grip tightened on the wheel. What do you mean? I mean he came to see me about 2 weeks before he died. Asked me questions about the Iron Serpents, about their roots, their connections. I told him to leave it alone. I told him those people were dangerous. What did he say? He said some things were worth the risk. Elena felt the familiar burn of tears behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Did he tell you what he found? No, but whatever it was, it scared him, and your grandfather wasn't a man who scared easy. They reached the mine shaft just as dawn began to paint the sky pink. Elena led Harmon inside. Lantern held high, her free hand resting on the pistol tucked into her waistband. Crash was exactly where she'd left him, but his condition had worsened. His skin was gray, his breathing barely audible. Harmon dropped to his knees beside him, already pulling supplies from his bag. How long has he been like this? He was stable when I left. That was 2 hours ago. He's lost too much blood. I need to work fast. Elena stepped back, watching as Harmon worked with practiced efficiency. IV line, blood pressure cuff, surgical instruments that gleamed in the lantern light. You can help or you can pace, Harmon said without looking up. But you can't do both. She moved to his side, following his instructions, handing him tools holding pressure where he indicated. Time lost all meaning. It could have been minutes or hours before Harmon finally sat back, wiping sweat from his forehead. He'll live, for now, but he needs at least a week of rest before he can move again. We don't have a week. Then you'd better figure out how to buy one. Crash's eyes opened slowly, focusing on Harmon with difficulty. Doc, been a while. Not long enough, apparently. You look like hell. Feel like it too. Crash tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. The serpents. I know. Your friend here filled me in. Harmon began packing up his supplies. I've done what I can, but I'm not getting involved beyond this. Those people have a long reach, and I'm too old to start running. I understand. Do you? Harmon fixed him with a hard stare. Because the last person who went after the serpents is buried in the Coldwater Creek Cemetery. I'd hate to see his granddaughter end up the same way. He left without another word, his footsteps fading into the darkness. Elena sat down beside Crash, her back against the cold stone wall. He's scared. He's smart. There's a difference. Is there? Crash turned his head to look at her. You saved my life twice now. You didn't have to do any of this. Why, I already told you. You told me about your grandfather. But that's not all of it. His gray eyes held hers, searching. Nobody risks their life for a stranger without a reason. What's yours? Elena was quiet for a long moment. When I was 7, she finally said, my mother got sick. Cancer. The doctor said she had 6 months, maybe less. My father had already left, couldn't handle the pressure, so it was just her and me and my grandfather. She paused, the memories rising like water. For 5 months I watched her disappear. A little more every day, and I couldn't do anything. I was just a kid, helpless, useless. I made her soup she couldn't eat. I read her stories she couldn't hear. I held her hand while she... Her voice broke. She died on a Tuesday. It was raining. I remember thinking how unfair it was that the world just kept going like nothing had happened. Like she didn't matter. Crash said nothing, but his eyes never left her face. After that, I promised myself I would never be helpless again. I would never stand by and watch someone die if there was anything I could do to stop it. She looked at him, fierce and fragile. When I found you on that road bleeding surrounded by coyotes, I didn't see a stranger. I saw my chance to keep that promise. Elena, don't. She held up a hand. Don't tell me I'm brave or strong or any of that. I'm not. I'm just someone who's too stubborn to let the darkness win. Crash reached out and took her hand. His grip was weak but warm. Your grandfather was right about you. What do you mean? Before he died, he sent a message to our chapter. Said if anything happened to him, we should look out for his granddaughter. Said she was stronger than she knew. Elena stared at him. He knew he was going to die. He knew he was in danger. He just didn't know how close it was. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Her grandfather hadn't just been investigating the serpents, he'd been preparing for the worst, preparing for her to be alone. The notebook, she said suddenly. You said it had his handwriting in it. What else does it say? Crash hesitated. Are you sure you want to know? Tell me. He reached into his vest and pulled out the worn leather book. His fingers found a specific page, and he handed it to her. Elena read the words in the lantern light, her grandfather's familiar script blurring through tears. If you're reading this, Mija, then I'm gone. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth while I was alive. I was trying to protect you, but some secrets are too heavy to carry to the grave. The iron serpents killed your father. He didn't leave us. He tried to stop them. They made him disappear. Everything I've done since that day has been about getting justice for him, for you, for all the families they've destroyed. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I know you will. You're stronger than I ever was, Elena. Stronger than you know. Finish what I started. I love you, always. Abuelo. The notebook fell from Elena's hands. Her father. The man she'd hated for 20 years. The man she'd blamed for abandoning them. He hadn't left. He'd been murdered. Elena! Crash's voice seemed to come from very far away. Elena, breathe. She couldn't breathe. The world was tilting, spinning, everything she'd believed crumbling like ash. He told me he left. Her voice was barely a whisper. He told me my father walked out and never looked back. He let me hate him for years. For years, he was protecting you. If you'd known the truth. I would have done exactly what I'm doing now. I would have gone after them. Exactly. And you were just a child. You wouldn't have stood a chance. Elena picked up the notebook, clutching it to her chest like a lifeline. I have a chance now. Elena, they took everything from me. My mother, my father, my grandfather. Everything. She looked at him, and there was nothing fragile left in her eyes. Only steel. I'm going to destroy them. Crash held her gaze for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. Then we do it together. You can barely walk. I'll heal, and when I do, we'll make them pay for every single thing they've done. Elena extended her hand. He took it. Partners. Partners. Outside, the sun was fully up now, painting the Wyoming mountains in shades of gold and amber. But inside the mine shaft, two broken people had just forged an alliance that would shake the foundations of an empire built on blood and silence. Neither of them knew yet just how high this conspiracy reached, or how many more sacrifices would be required before the end. Crash's phone buzzed. Elena tensed immediately, reaching for her gun. Easy. Crash checked the screen, his expression darkening. It's from an unknown number. Don't answer it. It's a text. He read it, and all the color drained from his face. What? What does it say? He turned the phone toward her. 3 words. We have Harmon. Below the text was a photo. The old doctor bound to a chair, blood running down his face. Behind him, a man in a serpent's vest held a gun to his head. Another message appeared. Bring us the notebook. Coldwater Creek, midnight. or we mail you pieces of him." Elena's blood turned to ice. Harmon. The man who'd just saved Crash's life. The man who'd known her grandfather. "It's a trap," Crash said. "Obviously. We can't go. We can't not go. Elena, they'll kill us both. And if we don't show up, they'll kill him. Then they'll come for us anyway." She stood up, pacing the small space. "At least this way we control the timing. We don't control anything. We're outgunned, outmanned, and I can barely stand. Then we don't go to fight." An idea was forming in her mind, dangerous and desperate. We go to negotiate. With what they want, the notebook. And we want Harmon, so we make a trade. They'll never honor it. They don't have to. They just have to believe we will. Crash studied her, something like admiration flickering behind the pain in his eyes. "You have a plan. The beginning of one." She knelt beside him, her voice dropping low. "That GPS beacon in your vest. You said it would bring your chapter. And the serpents. Right. So what if we trigger it at exactly the right moment?" Understanding dawned on his face. Draw them into a war they're not expecting. The angels versus the serpents, on our terms, on our ground. It's risky, if the timing's off. If the timing's off, we're dead anyway. At least this way we have a chance. Crash was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his vest and pulled out the beacon. Midnight. Elena nodded. Midnight. He pressed the button 3 times and held. A tiny red light blinked once, twice, then went dark. The signal was sent. In a clubhouse 200 miles away, phones began to ring. And in Coldwater Creek, a storm was gathering that would change everything. Elena checked her grandfather's watch. 14 hours until midnight. 14 hours to prepare for a battle that would either free them or bury them. She looked at Crash, at the notebook clutched in her hands, at the cold stone walls of the only safe place she had left. "Get some rest," she said. "You're going to need it." "What about you?" "I'm going to figure out how to win a war." She walked to the entrance of the mine and stared out at the mountains, her grandfather's words echoing in her mind. "Finish what I started." "I will, abuelo," she whispered. "I promise." Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the peaks. But it wasn't thunder. It was the sound of 100 engines roaring to life. 11 hours before midnight, Elena made a decision that would either save them or destroy everything. She drove back to Coldwater Creek alone. Crash had argued against it, his voice raw with pain and frustration. "You're walking into their territory. They'll grab you before you get within a mile of town." "They won't, because they don't know I'm coming." "Elena, I need to see the ground. I need to know what we're walking into tonight. You can't move, and we can't plan a war blind." He'd grabbed her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "If anything happens to you, then you press that beacon again and bring hell down on them." She'd pulled free gently. "But nothing's going to happen. I grew up in that town. I know every back road, every hiding spot, every shadow. They're the outsiders here, not me." She'd left before he could argue more. Now, parked on a ridge overlooking the main road into Coldwater Creek, Elena watched through her grandfather's old binoculars. The town looked normal at first glance, a few cars at the diner, old Mrs. Patterson walking her dog, teenagers skateboarding in the empty grocery store parking lot. But then she saw them. 2 black trucks parked behind the hardware store. A man in a serpent's vest smoking outside the gas station. Another leaning against the wall of the sheriff's office, talking casually with a deputy like they were old friends. Her stomach turned. Sheriff Dawson himself emerged from the office, shook hands with the serpent, and climbed into his patrol car. They were everywhere. Not just criminals operating in the shadows, they were part of the town's infrastructure. Protected. Embedded. "How deep does this go, Abuelo?" she whispered. Her phone buzzed. A text from Crash. "Anything," she typed back quickly. "Serpents all over town. Sheriffs with them. At least 8 visible. Probably more." His response came immediately. "Get out of there." "Not yet. Need to find where they're keeping Harmon." "Elena, don't." She turned off her phone. Getting into town undetected required patience Elena didn't have. She abandoned the truck 2 miles out and cut through the old Hendricks property, now abandoned since the family moved to Denver. The fence was rusted, easy to slip through, and the overgrown fields provided cover all the way to the back of Main Street. She emerged behind the barbershop, heart pounding, every nerve on fire. The sounds of normal life surrounded her, someone's radio playing country music, a dog barking the distant rumble of a truck on the highway. But underneath it all was something wrong, something watchful. Elena moved quickly, staying in the gaps between buildings, using the skills her grandfather had taught her during countless hunting trips. "Move like the deer," he'd said. "Never break the pattern. Never draw the eye." She made it 3 blocks before she heard the voice. Well, look what we got here." Elena froze. The man stepped out from a doorway she'd just passed, cutting off her retreat. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with a shaved head and a serpent tattoo crawling up his neck. "You're that girl, aren't you? The one who's been causing all the trouble." Elena's hand moved toward her pistol, but before she could draw, she felt cold metal press against the back of her skull. "I wouldn't," said a second voice behind her. They'd been waiting, watching the approaches, and she'd walked right into their trap. The first man stepped closer, grinning. "Boss is gonna be real happy to see you. Saves us the trouble of hunting you down tonight." "Where's Harmon?" "The old doc, he's around. Probably still got all his fingers if that's what you're worried about." The grin widened. "For now, I want to see him." "I'm sure you do, but that's not how this works." He grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. "You're coming with us. And if you scream, struggle, or do anything stupid, my friend here puts a bullet in your brain. Understand?" Elena understood. She also understood that she was running out of options. They marched her through the back alleys, past the boarded-up movie theater and the closed-down bank, until they reached a building she recognized with a jolt of nausea. Her grandfather's shop. The Iron Serpents had made it their headquarters. They shoved her through the door, and the familiar smell of motor oil and old leather hit her like a physical blow. But everything had been rearranged, corrupted. Her grandfather's tools were scattered on the floor. His photographs had been torn from the walls. In their place hung serpent banners, crude and triumphant. "Found her skulking around Main Street." Her captor pushed her forward. "Boss, meet Elena Cruz." The man in the center of the room turned slowly. He was older than she'd expected, late 50s, maybe 60, with silver hair pulled back in a ponytail and eyes the color of a frozen lake. His face was lined with scars, and his hands were adorned with rings that looked like they'd drawn blood more than once. "Miguel's granddaughter." His voice was soft, almost gentle. "I've heard a lot about you." "I've heard a lot about you too, none of it good." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "My name is Vincent Carrera. I run the Iron Serpents, and you have something that belongs to me. The notebook isn't yours." "No, but the secrets inside it are, secrets that could destroy everything I've built." He stepped closer, studying her face like she was a puzzle to be solved. "You look like him, you know. Miguel. Same stubborn jaw, same fire in the eyes. He was a worthy adversary. I almost respected him. You killed him. I removed a threat, There's a difference. Elena's hands trembled with rage, but she forced her voice to stay steady. And my father? Was he a threat too? Something flickered across Carrera's face. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. Ah, so you found that part of the story. He sighed, almost theatrically. Your father was a fool. He stumbled onto our operation 20 years ago and thought he could be a hero. We gave him a choice: walk away and keep his family safe, or die and leave them vulnerable. He chose poorly. You're lying. Am I your grandfather spent 2 decades believing the same thing, that your father had abandoned you? We made sure of it. Forged letters, fake sightings in Mexico, whispers of a new family. It was elegant, really. Why kill a man's reputation when you can make his own loved ones do it for you? The cruelty of it stole Elena's breath. 20 years of hatred based on lies. 20 years of her grandfather carrying guilt that wasn't his to bear. You destroyed us, she whispered. No, I protected myself. There's a difference. Carrera turned away, gesturing to his men. Put her with the doctor. We'll deal with both of them at midnight. Wait. Elena's voice came out stronger than she felt. I know where the notebook is. Carrera paused. Crash has it. He's injured hiding. I'm the only one who knows where. Then you'll tell us. No, but I'll take you there. In exchange for Harmon. And a head start before midnight. One of the guards laughed. She's got guts, I'll give her that. Carrera silenced him with a look. Then he approached Elena slowly, his cold eyes searching her face. You're lying. You wouldn't give up your partner that easily. My partner is a stranger who nearly got me killed. The doctor saved his life, and he doesn't deserve to die for someone else's war. She met his gaze unflinchingly. I'm a survivor, Mr. Carrera, just like you, and survivors know when to cut their losses. A long moment of silence stretched between them. Then Carrera smiled, a real smile this time, cold as winter. I believe you actually mean that. He nodded to his men. Bring the doctor. We're going for a ride. They brought Harmon out 10 minutes later. His face was bruised, his wrists raw from bindings, but his eyes were alert. When he saw Elena, something like despair crossed his features. You shouldn't have come for me. Wasn't given much choice. The notebook. I know what I'm doing. She hoped that was true. They loaded them both into a black SUV, Elena in the front passenger seat, Harmon in the back, flanked by 2 guards. Carrera drove himself, which struck her as strange until she realized it meant he didn't fully trust his own men with this mission. Good. Distrust was something she could use. Where are we going? Carrera asked as they pulled onto the highway. Elena gave him directions toward the mountains, not to the mine shaft, but to an abandoned fire lookout station 3 miles east of it. She needed to buy time. Needed to get them far from town, where the angels could find them when they arrived. If they arrived. The drive took 45 minutes. Carrera made small talk like they were old friends, asking about her childhood, her grandfather, her plans for the future. Elena answered in monosyllables, her mind racing through contingencies. The lookout station appeared around a sharp bend, a skeletal tower rising from a rocky outcrop. Pull over here, Elena said. Carrera stopped the SUV. I don't see any hiding places. That's the point. Crash is in a cave about half a mile up the trail. He can't move, so you'll need to bring him down. But he's armed and he'll shoot anyone he doesn't recognize. Except you. Except me. Carrera studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to his men. Stay with the doctor. If she's not back in 30 minutes, start removing his fingers. I'll be back, Elena said. She climbed out of the SUV, hyper-aware of the gun pressed against her spine. Carrera followed her, his own weapon drawn and ready. They began the hike in silence. The trail was steep, rocky, treacherous in the fading light. Elena moved slowly, buying every second she could, while her mind screamed at her to run. But running wouldn't save Harmon. Running wouldn't bring justice for her father and grandfather. Running was what the serpents expected. She was done being expected. "You're stalling," Carrera said after 10 minutes. "I'm being careful. One wrong step, and you lose your guide. I'm losing patience. You've waited 20 years to destroy my family. You can wait another 20 minutes. He grabbed her arm, spinning her around to face him. "I don't know what game you're playing, but it ends now. Where is he?" Elena looked past his shoulder toward the ridge behind them, and smiled. "I think you're about to find out." The first motorcycle crested the hill like an apparition from Hellchrome, gleaming engine-roaring rider, clad in black leather and patches of red and white. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the ridge was lined with Hell's Angels. 10, 20, 50, more appearing every moment, engines thundering in unison like the heartbeat of an approaching storm. Carrera's face went white. "You triggered the beacon. Hours ago? You played me. I learned from the best." Elena's voice was ice. "My grandfather taught me that the best trap is one your enemy walks into willingly. You wanted the notebook so badly you didn't stop to think why I'd offer to help you find it." The angels began their descent, forming a loose circle around the outcrop. The lead rider, the president of the Black Ridge chapter, dismounted and removed his helmet. His face was weathered, his eyes ancient, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 100 battles. "Vincent Carrera, been looking for you for a long time." Carrera still had his gun trained on Elena, but his hand was shaking now. "This is between me and the girl. Club business is exactly what this is. You killed one of ours. Who that broken-down enforcer, he's nobody. Not Crash." The president's eyes found Elena. Miguel Cruz. Ghost. One of the founding members of the Black Ridge chapter before he retired. His granddaughter activated the emergency beacon. That makes this personal. Elena felt the words hit her like a wave. Her grandfather hadn't just ridden with the angels. He'd helped found them. "He never told me," she whispered. "He wanted you to have a normal life, away from all this." The president's expression softened for just a moment. "But blood doesn't forget, and neither do we." Carrera was backing toward the edge of the outcrop, now gun swinging between Elena and the approaching bikers. "I'll kill her. I'll kill her right now." "No," Elena's voice was calm. "You won't." She moved faster than he expected, a quick step inside his reach, her hand closing around his wrist, twisting the gun away just as her knee connected with his groin. He doubled over, gasping, and she brought her elbow down on the back of his neck. He hit the ground hard and didn't get up. Elena stood over him, breathing hard, her grandfather's training flowing through her muscles like muscle memory. "That was for my father," she said. "And this..." She kicked him once hard in the ribs. "That was for my abuelo." The angels closed in their shadows, falling across Carrera's crumpled form. "What do you want done with him?" the president asked Elena. She looked at the man who had destroyed her family, who had built an empire on trafficking and murder and lies. Part of her wanted to end him right there, put a bullet in his skull and walk away. But that wasn't justice. That was just another kind of violence. The notebook has everything. Names, dates, transactions. Enough to bring down his entire organization and every corrupt cop who protected them. She straightened her spine. "I want him to stand trial. I want the world to know what he did. And I want him to rot in prison knowing that a 19-year-old girl took down everything he built." The president nodded slowly. "Your grandfather would be proud." I know. One of the angels approached a phone in his hand. Boss, we've got a problem. The SUV down by the trailhead, it's gone. Elena's blood ran cold. Harmon. She grabbed the phone, dialing the number Crash had given her. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice she didn't recognize answered. Nice try, little girl, but you didn't get all of us. The line went dead. Elena looked at the president, her heart pounding. They have the doctor, and they're running. The hunt wasn't over yet. It was just beginning. The angels mobilized in seconds, half-stayed to secure Carrera, binding his wrists and loading him onto a bike for transport. The other half mounted up and roared down the mountain toward the highway, Elena riding behind the president on his Harley, the wind screaming past her ears. She didn't feel fear anymore. She didn't feel exhaustion or doubt. She felt something older, something fiercer. Fury. They found the SUV abandoned 3 miles from town, its doors hanging open, engines still running. Tire tracks led toward the old mining district, a maze of abandoned shafts and crumbling buildings where someone who knew the terrain could hide for hours. They're trying to regroup, the president said. Probably have a secondary location somewhere in those hills. I know these hills, Elena said, better than anyone. She directed them through back trails and forgotten roads, her grandfather's voice guiding her like a ghost. Left at the dead oak tree, right past the collapsed water tower, straight through the dry creek bed where they used to hunt rabbits in the fall. And then she saw it. A building she'd almost forgotten about, an old miner's barracks her grandfather had pointed out years ago. Used to be a hideout for bootleggers during Prohibition, he'd said. Good place to disappear if you ever need to. Apparently the serpents had found it too. 2 trucks were parked outside their headlights, cutting through the gathering darkness. Elena counted 4 men visible, all armed, all watching the approaches. They're dug in, the president observed. Then we dig them out. That's suicide. No. Elena slid off the bike, checking her pistol. That's justice. She didn't wait for permission. She moved through the shadows, using every ounce of skill her grandfather had given her, until she was within 30 yards of the building's rear entrance. Through a grimy window she could see Harmon slumped in a chair, blood dripping from a fresh wound on his temple. 2 guards stood over him, arguing about something she couldn't hear. Elena took a breath. Then she kicked in the door. The first guard spun toward her, but she was already firing 2 shots to center mass that dropped him like a stone. The second lunged for his weapon, and she put him down with a single round through the shoulder. Harmon looked up, his eyes widening. Elena, can you walk? I think so. Then move. She hauled him to his feet, just as shouts erupted outside. The remaining serpents had heard the gunfire and were converging on the building. There's no way out, Harmon said. There's always a way out. She dragged him toward a side door she'd spotted through the window and found it blocked by a man twice her size, his fist already swinging toward her face. The blow connected, sending her sprawling. Her pistol skittered across the floor, too far to reach. The man advanced, cracking his knuckles, grinning like he'd already won. End of the road, little girl. Elena spat blood and smiled. You sure about that? The wall behind him exploded inward. A Harley-Davidson crashed through the rotting wood, its rider flying off the seat and tackling the serpent to the ground. More angels poured through the gap, their war cries mixing with gunfire and chaos. Elena grabbed her pistol and pulled Harmon toward the breach. Outside, the night had become a battlefield. Chrome and steel and leather moved like a living tide, overwhelming the remaining serpents through sheer force of numbers. Within minutes it was over. Elena stood in the center of the carnage, Harmon leaning heavily against her, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The president approached her, blood spattered across his vest, but otherwise unharmed. "You're crazy," he said. "I learned from my grandfather." He laughed, actually laughed, and extended his hand. "Welcome to the family, Elena Cruz." She took it without hesitation. In the distance, the sound of sirens began to wail, but for the first time in months, Elena wasn't afraid of what was coming. She was ready. The sirens grew louder, cutting through the night like a warning. Elena counted 3 patrol cars, screaming up the mountain road, their lights painting the trees red and blue. "We need to move," the president said. "Cops won't care who's right and wrong. They'll arrest everyone." "Let them come." Elena stepped forward, the notebook clutched in her hand. "These aren't just local cops. I called the FBI 2 hours ago." The president stared at her. "You did what?" "The number was in my grandfather's notebook. A contact he'd been building a case for. Someone he trusted." She held up the worn leather book. "Agent Sarah Mitchell, Organized Crime Division. She's been waiting for this evidence for 3 years." The first car skidded to a stop, and Elena braced herself for chaos. But instead of Sheriff Dawson's sneering face, a woman emerged, mid-40s, dark hair pulled back tight, a federal badge glinting in the headlights. "Elena Cruz." "That's me." Agent Mitchell approached slowly, her eyes scanning the scene, the bound serpents, the armed angels, the teenage girl standing in the middle of it all, like she belonged there. "Your grandfather spoke highly of you," Mitchell said. "He said if anything happened to him, you'd finish what he started." He was right. Elena handed over the notebook. Mitchell flipped through it quickly, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to something like shock. "This is everything. Names, accounts, routes, payoffs." She looked up. "Including Sheriff Dawson. Page 47. He's been on their payroll for 12 years. Mitchell signaled to her team. More federal vehicles were arriving now, filling the mountain clearing with organized chaos. Serpents were being loaded into transport vans. Evidence was being tagged and bagged. "We'll need your statement," Mitchell said. "And his." She nodded toward Harmon, who was being treated by a paramedic. "You'll get everything. But first," Elena turned toward the angels who had gathered in a loose formation nearby, engines idling. "They helped me. Without them, Carrera would have killed me and disappeared." Mitchell studied the bikers for a long moment. Hell's Angels aren't exactly known for community service. "My grandfather was one of them, founding member of the Black Ridge chapter." Something flickered across Mitchell's face. Recognition. Understanding. "Ghost. I should have made the connection sooner. He was legendary. He was my abuelo, and these men honored his memory tonight." Mitchell made a decision. "I didn't see any angels here, just concerned citizens who happened to be in the area." She extended her hand to Elena. "Your grandfather would be proud." Everyone keeps saying that. Because it's true. The next 6 hours blurred together in a haze of questioned statements and bitter coffee. Elena sat in a federal mobile command center repeating her story over and over to different agents with different questions. "How did you find Carrera? Why did your grandfather have this notebook? Who else knew about the trafficking operation?" She answered everything honestly, holding nothing back. Her grandfather had taught her that truth was the most powerful weapon, harder to fight than any bullet because it couldn't be denied. By dawn, word had spread. Sheriff Dawson was arrested at his home, still in his pajamas, trying to destroy files on his computer. 3 of his deputies went down with him. The county coroner who had signed off on her grandfather's death certificate was taken in for questioning about a dozen suspicious cases over the past decade. But the biggest shock came at 7:47 a.m. Agent Mitchell found Elena sitting on the back bumper of an ambulance, wrapped in a blanket exhaustion carved into every line of her face. "We found something," Mitchell said carefully. "In Carrera's records." "More evidence?" "Not exactly." Mitchell sat down beside her. "Elena, there's no easy way to say this. We found documentation suggesting your father might still be alive." The world stopped. "What?" "Carrera kept records of everyone he dealt with, including people he didn't actually kill." Mitchell pulled out a folder. "According to this, your father was transported to a facility in Montana 20 years ago, a private rehabilitation center that's actually a prison for people who know too much to kill but can't be allowed to talk." Elena couldn't breathe. "He's alive. All this time, he's been alive. We don't know for certain. This facility was shut down 8 years ago when funding dried up. The inmates were supposedly transferred, but the records are incomplete." Mitchell placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm telling you this because you deserve to know, but I don't want you to get your hopes up." "Where was it, this facility?" "Outside Billings. The building's been abandoned for years." Elena stood up, the blanket falling from her shoulders. "I need to go there." "Elena, it's a long shot. The odds of him still being... I need to know. Either way, I need to know." Mitchell sighed. "I can't stop you, but at least let me send someone with you. For safety." Elena looked toward the group of angels still lingering near the command center, refusing to leave until they knew she was okay. "I think I've got that covered." She found Crash sitting in the back of an ambulance, his leg properly splinted, now color slowly returning to his face. When he saw her approaching, he tried to stand. "Don't." She pushed him gently back down. "You're in no shape to be a hero." "Funny. I was about to say the same to you." He studied her face. "Something happened." "What is it?" She told him everything, the FBI, the arrests, and now this impossible hope about her father. Crash was quiet for a long moment. "Montana's a long ride," he finally said, "especially for someone with a broken leg." "Good thing I'm not going alone." He looked past her to where the president was approaching, his expression unreadable. "Boss, we got a situation." The president listened as Elena explained. When she finished, he pulled out his phone and made a single call. "Brothers, we ride for Montana. One of our own needs us." Within 30 minutes, 40 angels had assembled for the journey. Elena rode behind Crash, her arms wrapped around his waist, her heart pounding with a hope she was terrified to feel. They reached the abandoned facility outside Billings by late afternoon. The building was exactly what Mitchell had described, a crumbling structure that had once been a hospital, now overtaken by weeds and decay. "Place looks empty," the president observed. "It's been 8 years," Elena said. "I didn't expect him to still be here." "Then what are we looking for? Answers, records, anything that tells me where they took him." They spread out through the building, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Elena found herself drawn to the basement, a maze of narrow corridors and locked doors that her grandfather's lockpicking lessons made short work of. In the third room she searched, she found a filing cabinet. Rusted, dented, but still intact. Inside were patient records, dozens of them, each one documenting a person who had officially ceased to exist. She flipped through them frantically until she found it. Patient 947. Marco Cruz. Her father's photograph stared up at her, younger than she'd imagined, with her eyes and her grandfather's stubborn jaw. Alive. Real. Not a ghost or a memory, but a man who had existed in this place for years while she grew up believing he'd abandoned her. The file documented his time at the facility, medical treatments, psychological evaluations, transfer orders. And then, on the final page, a note dated 8 years ago. Patient transferred to secondary location. Clearwater Farm. Status ongoing. Elena's hands shook. Crash. He found her minutes later limping down the corridor with 2 other angels as backup. What did you find? She showed him the file, unable to speak through the emotion choking her throat. Crash read it quickly, his expression hardening. Clearwater Farm. I know that name. What is it? It's supposed to be an agricultural rehabilitation center. Work farm for low-risk offenders. But there have been rumors for years that it's something else. A place where people disappear. Where is it? About 60 miles from here. But Elena... He grabbed her arm as she turned to leave. If your father is there, he's been a prisoner for 20 years. We don't know what condition he'll be in. We don't know if he'll even recognize you. I don't care. Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice was steel. He's my father. He didn't leave us. He's been suffering while we hated him for something he never did. I'm getting him out. Crash looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Then let's go get your dad. Clearwater Farm was exactly what it pretended to be on the surface. A sprawling property with fields and barns and workers moving slowly under the afternoon sun. But Elena noticed the fences were too high, the guards too numerous, the workers too silent. This wasn't rehabilitation. This was imprisonment. The president pulled up beside her, his engine idling low. How do you want to play this? I walk in the front door and ask questions. If they don't like my questions, then we do it your way. And if they just shoot you, then you definitely do it your way. She dismounted before anyone could argue, walking toward the main gate, with nothing but her grandfather's badge in her pocket, the one she'd found in his belongings after he died, the one that marked him as a Hell's Angel for life. A guard stepped forward, hand on his holster. This is private property. You need to leave. I'm looking for my father, Marco Cruz. I have reason to believe he's being held here against his will. The guard's face flickered just for a moment, but Elena caught it. There's no one here by that name. Then you won't mind if I look around. Lady, I'm going to ask you one more time to leave before what? The president's voice cut through the air as 40 motorcycles rumbled closer, forming a wall of chrome and leather behind Elena. Before you make a real bad decision. The guard's hand dropped from his holster. His eyes darted toward the main building, looking for guidance, finding none. I don't want any trouble, Elena said calmly. I just want my father. Give him to me, and we leave peacefully. Make this difficult, and I promise you every federal agent from here to Washington will be on your doorstep by morning. I've got the FBI on speed dial and a notebook full of evidence that connects this place to Vincent Carrera's trafficking operation. Your choice. The guard's face went pale. Wait here. He disappeared into the building. 5 minutes passed. 10. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Then the door opened again, and a man walked out. He was thin, too thin, with gray hair and a beard that hadn't been trimmed in weeks. His clothes hung loose on a frame that had once been strong, and his movements were slow, uncertain, like someone who had forgotten how to exist in open spaces. But his eyes were hers. Elena. His voice cracked on her name like he wasn't sure he was allowed to say it. Is that really? She ran. The distance between them disappeared in seconds, and then she was in his arms, sobbing against his chest, 20 years of grief and anger and loss pouring out of her in a flood she couldn't control. I thought you left us, she choked. I thought you didn't want us. Never. His arms tightened around her, his own tears falling into her hair. Never, mija. Not for a single day. They told me you and your mother were dead. They said your grandfather had died in a car accident. I had nothing to live for except the hope that someday the truth would come out. Mama's gone. She died when I was 7. Cancer. She felt him shudder. And your grandfather? 6 months ago. They killed him because he was getting too close to the truth. Marco pulled back, holding her face in his hands, studying her like he was memorizing every detail. But you found it. The truth. You're here. I had help. She turned toward the angels who had dismounted and were watching the reunion with expressions ranging from stoic to openly moved. They're Abuelo's family, and now they're mine. Marco's gaze found the president, and something passed between them. Recognition, respect, the weight of shared history. Ghosts' brothers, Marco said quietly. He always said they'd come through when it mattered. He was right. The president stepped forward. You're welcome with us, Marco, for as long as you need. I don't know how to thank you. Thank your daughter. She's the one who moved heaven and earth to find you. Marco looked at Elena, pride and sorrow and love all warring in his expression. Your grandfather trained you well. He did. But now I have both of you. The parts of my family I thought I'd lost forever. She wiped her eyes. We have a lot to catch up on. We have the rest of our lives. The ride back to Wyoming was the longest and shortest of Elena's life. She sat behind Crash, her father riding with another angel, and watched the mountains roll past like a dream she'd finally woken up from. By the time they reached Coldwater Creek, word had spread. The townspeople who had hidden behind closed doors while the serpents terrorized them were now gathered on the main street, watching the convoy roll in. Agent Mitchell was waiting at Elena's grandfather's shop, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I heard you found him. I did. And the farm, shut it down, found 6 other prisoners who'd been there for years. Families have been notified. Mitchell shook her head. You did in 2 days what we couldn't do in 10 years. I had motivation. You had courage. There's a difference. Mitchell handed her a thick folder. The full case file. Everything your grandfather collected plus everything we've added since yesterday. Carrera's going away for life. So is Sheriff Dawson. And about 30 other people up and down the chain. Elena took the folder, feeling the weight of it in her hands. This was her grandfather's legacy, a lifetime of work finally bearing fruit. What happens now? She asked. Now you live, Elena? You've earned it. Live. Such a simple word. But for Elena, it felt like the first breath after drowning. That night she sat on the porch of her grandfather's shop with her father beside her, watching the stars appear one by one. He kept everything, Marco said softly, looking around at the tools and photographs Miguel had collected over the decades. I see myself in these pictures, like he was keeping me alive through memory. He never stopped looking for you. Even when he thought you'd abandoned us, some part of him must have known the truth. Your grandfather was the best man I ever knew. When they took me, I knew he'd figure it out eventually. I just didn't know it would take 20 years. He turned to look at her. And I didn't know it would be his granddaughter who finally brought me home. I had a good teacher. You had the best. Crash appeared in the doorway, his leg in a proper cast, now a cup of coffee in each hand. Thought you two might need these. Elena took hers gratefully. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck and then dragged through a war. So pretty standard Tuesday. He lowered himself carefully onto the porch step. The chapter's heading back to Blackridge tomorrow. President wants to know if you're coming with us. Elena looked at her father, then at the shop, then at the mountains that had been her home for 19 years. Not yet, she said. There's still work to do here, people to help, a legacy to honor. Crash nodded slowly. Figured you'd say that? He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small metal badge, the same winged emblem her grandfather had worn for 30 years. "President wanted you to have this. You're officially one of us now. Honorary member of the Blackridge chapter." Elena took the badge, running her fingers over the worn metal. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. You earned it." She pinned the badge to her jacket, right over her heart. In the distance, the sound of 40 engines roared to life as the angels prepared to leave. But Elena knew now that distance didn't matter. Family wasn't about proximity. It was about who showed up when the wolves came. And she would never be alone again. 6 weeks later, Coldwater Creek had become something it had never been before, a place people actually wanted to visit. Elena stood behind the counter of her grandfather's shop, now transformed into a roadside haven for riders, veterans, and wanderers. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with motor oil, and the walls displayed photographs of the angels who had saved her life, alongside images of her grandfather in his younger days. "3 more just pulled in," Marco called from the garage bay where he was changing oil on a vintage Indian. "Looks like they heard about us from the Billings chapter. Send them in for coffee. I just made a fresh pot." Elena poured 3 cups and set them on the counter just as the riders entered 2 men and a woman, all wearing leather cuts with patches from different chapters across the western states. Word had spread fast through the biker community about the girl who had taken down the Iron Serpents and reunited with her father. Now riders came from hundreds of miles away just to meet her and pay their respects. "Your wolf girl?" the woman asked, studying Elena with sharp, assessing eyes. "That's what they call me." "Heard you shot 3 serpents and didn't blink." "I blinked, just did it afterward." The woman laughed, a rough sound that spoke of years on the road. "Ghost's granddaughter, all right. He trained you good." "The best teacher I ever had." They stayed for an hour, sharing stories about her grandfather runs he'd led, fights he'd won, the time he'd ridden through a blizzard to deliver medicine to a snowed-in town. Each story added another layer to the man Elena had loved, revealing depths she'd never known. After they left, she found herself staring at the framed photograph behind the register. Her grandfather, young and fierce, standing beside his Harley with the Blackridge chapter spread out behind him. She hadn't known this version of him, the legend, the founding member, the man called Ghost, but she was starting to understand why he'd kept it hidden. "He wanted you to be free," Marco said, appearing beside her. He'd gained weight in the past 6 weeks, his color returning, his movements growing stronger every day. Free from the life he chose, free from the enemies he made. "But I ended up in it anyway. Some things are in the blood, mija. He knew that better than anyone." The bell above the door chimed. Elena looked up and felt her heart skip. Crash walked in. His leg was healed now, though he still moved with a slight limp that the doctors said might never fully disappear. He'd been gone for 3 weeks back at the Blackridge clubhouse handling business, and she hadn't expected to see him again so soon. "You're here?" she said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "Promised I'd come back, didn't I? You didn't actually promise." "Implied it pretty strongly." He crossed to the counter and accepted the coffee she poured automatically. "Place looks good. Better than I remember." "We've been busy." "I heard. Word is you've turned this into the best rest stop between Denver and Seattle. Riders are talking about it from coast to coast." Elena shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just trying to give people a place to belong, like Abuelo would have wanted." Crash studied her face in that way he had, seeing more than she wanted to show. "You sleeping yet?" "Sometimes. Nightmares. Sometimes. They'll fade. Takes time, but they fade." She wanted to ask how he knew. She wanted to ask about his own demons, the brother he'd lost, the years of violence that had shaped him into the man standing before her now. but some questions weren't meant for coffee shop conversation. "Why are you really here?" she asked instead. "President sent me. We've got a situation." "What kind of situation?" "The kind that might interest you." He pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. A young woman, maybe 16, with hollow eyes and bruises that makeup couldn't hide. "Her name's Jessica. She was one of the girls the serpents were trafficking. We found her in a safe house outside Portland." "Is she okay?" "Physically, she's healing, but she won't talk to anyone, won't eat, won't sleep. The counselors are doing their best, but she's slipping away." "What does this have to do with me? She asked for you." Elena frowned. "I don't understand. I've never met her." "No, but she knows your story. Everyone does now. The girl who took down the serpents. The girl who wasn't afraid to fight." Crash set down his coffee. "She thinks you're the only one who might understand what she's been through. I'm not a counselor. I don't know anything about trauma or therapy, or you know about survival. You know about being alone and scared and feeling like nobody in the world gives a damn, whether you live or die." His voice was gentle, but firm. "Sometimes that's enough." Elena looked at her father, who had been listening from the garage doorway. "Go," Marco said quietly. "This is what he trained you for. Not just to fight, but to protect. To help people who can't help themselves." "What about the shop?" "It'll be here when you get back, so will I." She turned to Crash. "When do we leave?" "Now, if you're willing." She was willing. The ride to Portland took 2 days. Elena rode behind Crash on his rebuilt Harley, the wind erasing everything except the road ahead and the warmth of his back against her chest. They stopped at chapter houses along the way, greeted by brothers who treated her like family. She'd known her whole life. At each stop, someone had a story about her grandfather. Ghost riding through enemy territory to rescue a fallen brother. Ghost standing up to corrupt cops before anyone else dared. Ghost living by a code that put loyalty above everything, even when it cost him. By the time they reached Portland, Elena felt like she knew him in ways she never had before. The legend had merged, with the memory creating something complete. The safe house was a converted church run by a non-profit that helped trafficking survivors. The director, a tired woman named Margaret, met them at the door with obvious relief. "Thank God you came. She's getting worse." "Where is she?" "Upstairs, second door on the left. She hasn't eaten in 3 days." Elena climbed the stairs alone, her boots echoing in the quiet hallway. The door was slightly open, and through the gap she could see a small figure curled on a bed facing the wall. She knocked softly. "Jessica?" No response. Elena pushed the door open and stepped inside. "My name's Elena. I heard you wanted to talk to me." "I wanted to see if you were real." The voice was barely a whisper, cracked and hollow. "Everyone says you're a hero, but heroes aren't real. I learned that a long time ago." "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who got angry enough to fight back." Slowly, Jessica turned over. Her face was thinner than the photograph, her eyes deeper, like someone had scooped out everything that made her human and left only the shell. "They hurt me," she said. "For 2 years they hurt me every day. And nobody came. Nobody cared. I care. You don't even know me. I know what it feels like to lose everything and have no one to turn to. I know what it's like to carry pain so heavy you can barely breathe. And I know what it's like to want to give up because it seems easier than fighting." Jessica's eyes flickered a tiny spark of something that might have been recognition. "How did you get past it?" she asked. "I didn't get past it. I got through it. There's a difference." Elena sat down on the edge of the bed, keeping her distance, but close enough to be present. Getting past means forgetting. Getting through means carrying it with you and finding a way to keep moving anyway. "What if I can't?" Then you try again tomorrow, and the day after that. And you keep trying until one day you realize you're still standing. And if that doesn't work... Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out her grandfather's badge, the winged emblem worn smooth by years of handling. You find people who'll carry you until you can stand on your own. Jessica stared at the badge. What is that? It belonged to my grandfather. He was the strongest man I ever knew, but even he needed help sometimes. He had brothers who would ride through fire for him, who would die for him. She pressed the badge into Jessica's palm. Now those brothers are mine, and if you want them to be, they can be yours too. Why would they want me? I'm broken. We're all broken, Jessica. That's how the light gets in. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then slowly, Jessica's fingers closed around the badge. Will you stay? She whispered. Just for a little while, as long as you need. Elena stayed for 3 days. She didn't try to counsel Jessica or heal her or fix what the serpents had broken. She simply existed beside her eating when Jessica ate sleeping, when Jessica slept sharing stories about her grandfather and father and the family she'd found among the angels. On the 3rd night, Jessica spoke more than a few sentences for the first time. She talked about her life before the trafficking, her mother who'd died of an overdose, her foster homes that ranged from indifferent to abusive, the man who'd promised her a better life and delivered her into hell instead. She talked about the things they'd done to her, the things they'd made her do, the parts of herself that had died one piece at a time until there was almost nothing left. And then she talked about Elena. I saw your story on the news, Jessica said. They interviewed people from your town. Everyone talked about how brave you were, how you didn't back down even when they outnumbered you 100 to 1. And I thought if she can fight, maybe I can too. You can. You already are. It doesn't feel like fighting. It feels like drowning. Fighting doesn't always look like throwing punches. Sometimes it looks like getting out of bed when every part of you wants to stay under the covers. Sometimes it looks like eating a meal when your body wants to disappear. Sometimes it looks like asking for help when you've been taught that help never comes. Elena took her hand. You asked for me, Jessica. You reached out when you could have given up. That's fighting. That's surviving. And I promise you it gets easier. Not quickly. Not painlessly. But eventually you'll wake up one morning and realize that the weight is a little lighter than it was the day before. How do you know? Because I'm still waiting for that morning, too. They sat together in the darkness, 2 survivors holding on to each other, while the world turned outside their window. When Elena finally left Portland, Jessica was eating again, talking again, taking small, shaky steps toward a future that had seemed impossible just days before. Margaret walked Elena to her bike gratitude written across her exhausted face. You gave her something none of us could, Margaret said. Hope. I just told her the truth. That's the same thing, isn't it? Elena rode back to Coldwater Creek alone. Crash had left the day before, called back to Blackridge for club business, but he'd promised to return for the anniversary. The anniversary. 1 year since her grandfather's death. 1 year since the night that had started everything. The grief, the investigation, the war that had consumed her life and transformed her into someone she barely recognized. When she pulled into the shop's parking lot, she found it full. Not just full overflowing. Motorcycles lined the street for half a mile in every direction. Angels from a dozen chapters gathered in numbers she'd never seen outside of a national run. And in the center of them all, standing beside her rebuilt grandfather's Harley, was her father. What is this? Elena asked, dismounting slowly. Your grandfather's memorial, Marco said. The one he never got. The one he deserved. The president of the Blackridge chapter stepped forward, his face solemn beneath his weathered features. "We ride for Ghost today," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "For a brother who gave everything to protect the innocent. For a man who left this life to raise his family, but never stopped being one of us." He turned to Elena. "And for his granddaughter who honored his memory by finishing what he started." Elena felt tears burning in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just ride." They mounted up 200 motorcycles, maybe more, their engines shaking the earth like thunder from the gods. Elena climbed onto her grandfather's Harley, the one Marco had spent weeks restoring to its former glory, and felt the rumble of the engine pass through her bones. Marco climbed on behind her. He would have loved this, you know. "I know." The convoy rolled out of Coldwater Creek, heading toward the mountains where her grandfather had taught her to shoot, to hunt, to survive. Where he'd shown her the mine shaft that would save her life. Where he'd told her stories about the men who would become her brothers. At the summit, they stopped. Elena stood at the edge of the cliff, looking out at the valley below, while 200 angels formed a circle behind her. "He always said the view from here made him feel small," she said quietly. "Small and free, like all the problems in the world couldn't touch him, as long as he had the road and the sky and his family beside him." She pulled a small box from her jacket, her grandfather's ashes saved for this moment. "I'm going to let you go now, Abuelo, but I want you to know everything you taught me, everything you sacrificed. It mattered. It saved lives. It brought Papa home. It gave me a family I never knew I had." Her voice cracked. "You were the best man I ever knew, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of your love." She opened the box and let the ashes fly free on the mountain wind. Around her, engines roared to life, a final salute from the brothers who had loved him, who had ridden with him, who would carry his memory as long as they lived. Elena closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. When she opened them again, Crash was standing beside her. "You okay?" "Yeah." She wiped her eyes. "I think I finally am." He took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "What now?" Now I live. I help people who need helping. I keep the shop running as a place where broken souls can find their way." She looked at him, a small smile playing at her lips. "And maybe I take a ride every now and then with a stubborn biker who doesn't know when to quit." "That could be arranged." They walked back to their bikes together, her father waiting with a proud smile on his face. "Ready to go home?" Marco asked. "I am home," Elena said. "I've been home all along. I just didn't know it." They rode back to Coldwater Creek as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. 200 engines thundered through the twilight, carrying the memory of a legend and the promise of a future built on his sacrifice. Elena Cruz, Wolf Girl, guardian angel. Her grandfather's legacy made flesh had found her pack, and she would never be alone again. Because family isn't blood. Family is who shows up when the wolves come. And for Elena, they had shown up 100 strong. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that courage can overcome anything, and that the loneliest souls can find their pack, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Because here we tell stories about the families we choose, the battles we fight, and the love that saves us when all seems lost. Keep your light on, riders. Someone out there needs to find their way home.